All right, so we're talking about Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann, and this is crazy. I'm having a similar experience to reading Chomsky in that just almost everything is marked up. I feel kind of bad, but just every page is, I might as well not be writing it because I just underline every single thing. So that being said, I do think I need to kind of go make sure that I'm good about going chapter by chapter on this because it is going to be a little bit long-winded. So to get into chapter 3, Contact and Opportunity. While censorship and privacy intercept much information at its source, a very much larger body of fact never reaches the whole public at all, or only very slowly, for there are very distinct limits upon the circulation of ideas. A rough estimate of the effort it takes to reach everybody can be had by considering the government's propaganda during the war. So he goes on to talk about, we had this guy, Mr. Creel, and his fight for the, quote, minds of men for the conquest of their convictions, in order that, quote, the gospel of Americanism might be carried to every corner of the globe, end quote. So Mr. Creel assembled this machinery, which included a division of news that issued, he tells us, his words, more than 6,000 releases, had to enlist 75,000 4-minute men who delivered at least 755,190 speeches to an aggregate of over 300 million people. Boy Scouts delivered annotated copies of President Wilson's address to the householders of America. Fortnightly periodicals were sent to 600,000 teachers. 200,000 lantern slides were furnished for illustrated lectures. And a whole catalog of other examples of the way in which they made a conscious effort and an exhaustive effort to spread information about the war effort. Probably this is the largest and most intensive effort to carry quickly a fairly uniform set of ideas to all the people of a nation. Now, if it required such extreme measures to reach everybody in time of crisis, how open are the more normal channels to men's minds? The administration was trying, and while the war continued, it very largely succeeded in creating something that might almost be called one public opinion all over America. But think of the dogged work, the complicated ingenuity, the money, and the personnel that were required. Nothing like that exists in time of peace. And as a corollary, there are whole sections, there are vast groups, ghettos, enclaves, and classes that hear only vaguely about much that is going on. They live in groves, are shut in among their own affairs, barred out of larger affairs, meet few people not in their own sort, or not of their own sort, read little, and read little. Travel and trade, the mails, the wire, and radio, railroads, highways, ships, motor cars, and the coming generation airplanes are, of course, of the utmost influence on the circulation of ideas. And I've added now the internet and computers obviously have to be included in that conversation for obvious reasons. But it's interesting once you get to kind of peel back the layers and start seeing it like this, because Each of these mediums, or transportation, whatever it might be, each of them affects the supply and the quality of information and opinion in a most intricate way. So they're all of these things, every single one of them, including the newer ones like the internet and computers and social media and things like that. They're affected by technical, economic, or political conditions. Every time a government relaxes the passport ceremonies or the customs inspection, every time a new railway or new port is opened, a new shipping line established, every time rates go up or down, the mails move faster or more slowly. The cables are uncensored and made less expensive, highways built or widened or improved. The circulation of ideas is influenced. Tariff schedules and subsidies affect the direction of commercial enterprise and therefore the nature of human contracts. And so these kind of unique attributes and just kind of the nature of both like the mediums, but also the processes, the technology, the systems, right? They all have little checkpoints that influence the circulation of ideas. It is certainly true that problems arising out of the means of communication are of the utmost importance, and one of the most constructive features of the program of the League of Nations has been the study given to railroad transit and access to the sea. The monopolizing of cables, of ports, fuel stations, mountain passes, canals, straits, rivers, river courses, terminals, marketplaces, all that means a good deal more than the enrichment of a group of businessmen or the prestige of a government. It means a barrier upon the exchange of news and opinion. But monopoly is not the only barrier. Cost and available supply are even greater ones. For if the cost of traveling or trading is prohibitive, if the demand for facilities exceeds the supply, the barriers exist even without monopoly. The size of a man's income has considerable effect on his access to the world beyond his neighborhood. With money, he can overcome almost every tangible obstacle of communication. He can travel, buy books, and periodicals, and bring within the range of his attention almost any known fact of the world. The income of the individual and the income of the community determine the amount of communication that is possible. Note that, huge. But men's ideas determine how that income shall be spent, and that in turn affects, in the long run, the amount of income they will have. Thus also there are limitations, none the less real, because they are often self-imposed and self-indulgent. And this next part is something that I think I addressed yesterday, or it's certainly been a thought that's been on my mind, and he does again a nice job of capturing what I'm trying to say. There are portions of the sovereign people who spend most of their spare time and spare money on motoring and comparing motor cars, on bridge whist and postmortems, on moving pictures and pot boilers, taking always to the same people with minute variations on the same old things. I'm going to say that one again because I think that's huge. I'm sorry, not taking. Talking always to the same people with minute variations on the same old themes. They cannot really be said to suffer from censorship or secrecy or the high costs or the difficulty of communication. They suffer from anemia, from lack of appetite and curiosity for the human scene. Theirs is no problem of access to the world outside. Worlds of interest are waiting for them to explore, and they do not enter. So this is, again, the talking always to the same people with minute variations on the same old themes. This is something that you go through your day, particularly a very modern issue, I think, or a modern experience is, man, the discourse in social life is so restrictive, and there are so many off-limits topics, or maybe more accurately, off-limits stances on certain topics, and so those topics become a don't go there type of thing. But more importantly, the point that I've been trying to capture, they suffer from anemia. So they're having these same conversations over and over again, but they don't know that, how that could possibly be bad or wrong, whatever. They lack the appetite and curiosity for the bigger picture. They're perfectly content in their little social circles, and to carry on with their sort of trivial assessments of the world. They move as if on a leash. And this is where he introduces the idea of social sets. And it is in the social set that ideas derived from reading and lectures and from the circle of talk converge, are sorted out, accepted, rejected, judged, and sanctioned. So our social sets consists of those who figure as people in the phrase people are saying. They are the people whose approval matters most intimately to us. In big cities, among men and women of wide interests, and with the means for moving about, the social set is not so rigidly defined. And in smaller communities, there may exist a freer circulation, a more genuine fellowship from after breakfast to before dinner. But few people do not know, nevertheless, which set they really belong to and which not. And so then we're kind of breaking down these social sets, and kind of the first point made is a distinguishing mark is the presumption that the children may intermarry. That is, the children of a social set can intermarry. Kind of that class hierarchy standard type of view of marriage. But economic position, however, is not measured by the amount of income. For in the first generation, at least, it is not income that determines social standing, but the character of a man's work, and it may take a generation or two before this fades out of the family tradition. Thus, banking, law, medicine, public utilities, newspapers, the church, large retailing, brokerage, manufacture, are all rated at a different social value, from salesmanship, superintendence, expert technical work, nursing, school teaching, shopkeeping, and those in turn are rated as differently from plumbing, being a chauffeur, dressmaking, subcontracting, or stenography, as these are from being a butler, lady's maid, a moving picture operator, or a locomotive engineer. And yet the financial return does not necessarily coincide with these gradations. So whatever the tests of admission, the social set, when formed, is not a mere economic class, but something which more nearly resembles a biological clan. Membership is intimately connected with love, marriage, and children, or to speak more exactly, with the attitudes and desires that are involved. And this next part is is big. In the social set, therefore, opinions encounter the canons of family tradition, respectability, propriety, dignity, taste, and form, which make up the social set's picture of itself, a picture assiduously implanted in the children. In this picture, a large space is tactily given to an authorized version of what each set is called upon inwardly to accept as the social standing of others. So let me break that down a little bit more. In each social set, right, we kind of highlighted the different groupings roughly, and those have changed since the writing of this book a little bit. But within those social sets, there are kind of group dynamics, group think about tradition, respectability, propriety, dignity, taste, and form. So the taste of the 1%, uber billionaires is likely to be very different taste than a modest, mail carrier or something like that. And so importantly, though, is in that second part of that, which is this picture provides this authorized version of what each set is called upon inwardly to accept as the social standing of others. So not only does it provide the expectations on those things like tradition or taste and form, but they also provide relational perspective between the other social sets. And so in order to be accepted into a particular social set, it isn't necessarily determined by economic class, but more so by the acceptance of those, kind of inward expectations, and that relationship to the external world. Within the social sets, there are the social leaders, and the social leaders, weighted with the ultimate eugenic responsibility, are peculiarly sensitive. Not only must they be watchfully aware of what makes for the integrity of their set, but they have to cultivate a special gift for knowing what other social sets are doing. They act as a kind of ministry of foreign affairs, where most of the members of a set live complacently within the set, regarding it for all practical purposes as the world. The social leaders must combine an intimate knowledge of the anatomy of their own set with a persistent sense of its place in the hierarchy of sets. So that gets into what I had just mentioned about providing that relationship to the other sets. And as Lippmann alluded to, that might be more of primarily focused with the social leaders or those desiring kind of the leadership role within their social set. Whereas a good chunk of the people in that set are going to be complacent with just accepting kind of what's presented to them as just how to operate, rather than considering the bigger picture, if that makes sense. So they don't often expand the scope of their understanding of other social sets, because they assume that they are in the proper social set, and why would I want to leave that? All my family and friends are here, kind of thing. But what's interesting about that is it reinforces hierarchy. And the hierarchy, in fact, is bound together by the social leaders. Some of the sets are so placed that they become what Professor Ross has called radiant points of conventionality. Thus, the social superior is likely to be imitated by the social inferior. The holder of power is imitated by subordinates, the more successful by the less successful, the rich by the poor, the city by the country. But imitation does not stop at frontiers. The powerful, socially superior, successful, rich, urban social set is fundamentally international throughout the Western Hemisphere, and in many ways, London is its center. And so it gets into this idea that its importance comes from the fact that here, at least, the distinction between, I should continue on. London is its center. It counts among its membership the most influential people in the world, containing as it does the diplomatic set, high finance, the upper circles of the army and navy, some princes of the church, a few great newspaper proprietors, their wives and mothers and daughters, who wield the scepter of invitation. It is at once a great circle of talk and a real social set. But its importance comes from the fact that here at last the distinction between public and private affairs practically disappears. The private affairs of this set are public matters, and public matters are as private, often its family affairs. The confinements of Margot Asquith, like the confinements of royalty, are, as philosophers say, in much the same universe of discourse as a tariff bill or a parliamentary debate. So I find that part really interesting, and I would like to kind of peel back some layers on that. It's talking about how, think about, and this is, more relevant today than ever. So the rise of influencers, but in Lippmann's time and kind of throughout history, this would be like the monarchy, the royal family, the Pope, right? These quintessential social figures. But in modern society, with the rise of celebrities and influencers, right? Consider the dynamic of their social set. Really, what makes them popular or provides them that social status is this inverse relationship between public and private affairs that compared to the average person. And so a branching thought that I have on this has to do with the idea that when you're looking at it through this frame, it becomes clear that influencers, let's for simplicity's sake, I think that's a great word to describe their presence especially in modern culture, right? They're there to influence. And how they do that and sort of their contribution to society is simply by making their private lives public and vice versa. And what this does is essentially provides models or that acceptable picture, the authorized version of what the sets that these influencers represent. They provide that authorized version of what it means to act, what that form, that tradition, that taste or dignity or respectability requires. And so their value is essentially, in a way, I think you could make a strong argument for the idea that they are part of just like this machine of propaganda. They spew out the official line of their social set. But there are large areas of governments in which this social set is not interested, and in America at least, it has exercised only a fluctuating control over the national government. Pausing here because this is increasingly turning out to be the opposite today, and especially recent developments have kind of flipped this on its head. But to continue on, its power in foreign affairs is always very great, and in wartime, its prestige is enormously enhanced. That is natural enough because these cosmopolitans have a contact with the outer world that most people do not possess. They have dined with each other in the capitals, and their sense of national honor is no mere abstraction. It is a concrete experience of being snubbed or approved by their friends. To Dr. Kennicott of Gopher Prairie, it matters mighty little what Winston thinks and a great deal what Ezra Stowbody thinks. But to Mrs. Mingott, with a daughter married to the Earl of Swithin, it matters a lot when she visits her daughter or entertains Winston himself. Dr. Kennicott and Mrs. Mingott are both socially sensitive, but Mrs. Mingott is sensitive to a social set that governs the world, while Dr. Kennicott's social set governs only the Gopher Prairie. But in matters that affect the larger relationships of the Great Society, Dr. Kennicott will often be found holding what he thinks is purely his own opinion, though as a matter of fact, it is trickled down to Gopher Prairie from high society, transmuted on its passage through the provincial social sets. We need only fix in mind how big is the part played by the social set in our spiritual contact with the world, how it tends to fix what is admissible and to determine how it shall be judged. Affairs within its immediate competence, each set more or less determines for itself. Above all, it determines the detailed administration of the judgment. I'm going to pause here and break that down a little bit more. So, depending on the social set, your form or whatever is going to be dependent on your social set, and that greatly influences your perspective on things. So in the higher society that's kind of wining and dining with these international communities of similarly wealthy people, their interest is maintaining those relationships because that is their social set. But of the Gopher Prairie set, right, they don't care, they only care about their community, right? If they're only kind of operating in that social set. And so it's interesting to see then, you only need to understand how big of an influence the social set is on our spiritual contact with the world. Interesting word choice to use spiritual there. But maybe just kind of that guiding, that philosophical, underlying presence that kind of helps guide you through the world. But not only that, it determines for each social set what actions, thoughts, or behaviors, or whatever it might be, are admissible, or which of them are subject to judgment. And those are based on patterns that might be inherited from the past, transmitted or imitated from other social sets, but typically it trickles down from the top of the social set. But I do think it's important to note here the implication of having different standards of judgment and acceptable behavior or thinking or whatever between the social sets. It inherently admits that different groups operate differently, they behave differently depending on their environment and their social set, which is something that we've addressed already. Hopefully this isn't too loud as I'm trying to fix the microphone. Fucking A. So finally, huge paragraph here at the end that I love. As against almost every other social set where the bulk of the opinions are firsthand only about local affairs, in the highest society, the big decisions of war and peace, of social strategy, and the ultimate distribution of political power are intimate experiences within a circle of what, potentially at least, are personal acquaintances in the higher society. Since position and contact play so big a part in determining what can be seen, heard, read, and experienced, as well as what is permissible to see, hear, read, and know, it is no wonder that moral judgment is so much more common than constructive thought. Yet in truly effective thinking, the prime necessity is to liquidate judgments, regain an innocent eye, disentangle feelings, be curious and open-hearted. I will add open-minded to that as well. Man's history being what it is, political opinion on the scale of the great society requires an amount of selfless equanimity. Equanimity being a state of mental balance and composure, especially in challenging situations. So selfless equanimity rarely attainable by anyone for any length of time. We are concerned in public affairs, but immersed in our private ones. The time and attention are limited that we can spare for the labor of not taking opinions for granted, and we are subject to constant interruption. So basically, I just read that chapter again, but I felt like I got a lot of my big talking points, takeaways in there. Here at the end, just wanted to, I don't know, like, it's hard for me to say this because I feel like in saying it, it probably indicates that it's not true, but still, this selfless equanimity is something that I think I just naturally possess. Obviously, I struggle with total mental balance and composure, especially in challenging situations. But that being said, I think I genuinely believe that if I had earned support, if I had earned the trust and found a group of people who thought similar to me, that I could sort of rally around me, that's all it would really take for me to just explode with confidence, but also kind of maintain that balance and composure. Going back to an example from a previous chapter in the book, like, oh man, what was I saying? From the example of the Senate hearing, where they were speculating or trying to decipher the details of that incident in Italy, where they were essentially one person with an ulterior motive kind of hijacked that speculation or uncertainty to push an agenda about something completely different. One of the takeaways that Lippmann provided there, or at least that I took away, was even these, these so-called well-trained, experienced lawyers have a hard time restraining themselves from not jumping to a conclusion in order to try to be ahead of the curve on the action items to happen depending on how the scenario plays out. In other words, I think that I would be good at consciously going into kind of any situation and just saying, hey, I'm not prepared to make any decisions or comment on speculation until I have a considerable amount of facts at my disposal, and can operate with near certainty in my conviction. So, I don't know, there's just a kind of little side tangent that came up on that. I don't know. This is all so far so interesting. I'm trying to capture exactly what it is that I'm enjoying so much. But kind of one of the things that I'm toying around with and thinking about more broadly than just within the context of this book as well is, how do I determine where I stand? I don't know. I gotta get this microphone thing figured out, and I don't feel like getting into that right this moment, so